Welcome back to a brand new PTCG live video. Today I'll be going over the top 10 or so decks that will be coming with Surging Sparks, our new expansion for November. It will be releasing this first week of November. And with that being said, let's get into these deck lists. Let's see which cards are going to be played here. So starting out with Archelodon EX here, it does combine it with the Dialga V-Star for that very good V-Star power Star Chronos, where you basically get to take 2 turns in a row, skipping one of your opponent's turns. And then with Archelodon, they do run a 4-4 line of Archelodon EX and the Duraludon. And with Archelodon, we do have the Alloy build. It's basically energy acceleration with this ability, where when you do evolve up this Pokemon, you can get 2 basic metal energies out of your discard pile and attach them to your metal Pokemon. So a pretty good replacement for Metang. We can build up the Dialga V-Star with Archelodon EX here. And then we do have the attack Metal Defender with 220 base damage, and then during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon has no weakness. So your opponent can't take a one-hit KO with a fire Pokemon and take a knockout for this. And then for their ace spec, they do run the secret box, which is really good because you have to discard 3 cards to use secret box. So it's a great way to discard 3 metal energies right away. And then you can search out your deck for a item card, tool card, supporter card, and a stadium card with that secret box ace spec. And then they do have the 1 copy of the Canceling Cologne, since they do run mostly ability Pokemon here, just in case your opponent tries to wall you out with the Cornerstone Ogerpon. We do have the Canceling Cologne. Moving on to the next deck list, it is another Archelodon deck list. It does run 4 Duraludon and 3 Archelodon EX instead, and 3 copies of the Luxray here for that explosiveness, where if you do open up the game with this card, you can put it in the active spot, and you can use that attack Seeking Fang, where you can search out for 2 trainer cards and put them into your hand. And then this deck really looks like it just tries to go for the bulkiness of Archelodon, where it does run the Relicanth here, so that you can use that attack from Duraludon, the Raging Hammer, do 80 damage, and then 10 more for each damage counter. So Archelodon can take on quite a few damage counters, of course, and then you can do quite a lot of damage with Raging Hammer. And then for the ace spec, they do have the Scoop Up Cyclone here, where you can put one of your Pokemon back into your hand with all the attached cards. So once your Archelodon takes on a lot of damage, you can just scoop it back up into your hand and then re-evolve it up and have a fresh one. And then other than that, it's pretty standard. It does have quite a lot of gusting options here, because I do notice they do have the 2 bosses and 3 copies of the Pokemon Catcher here. And it does have 3 copies of Pokestop as well, and 4 copies of Trekking Shoes for that extra draw support. And yeah, other than that, everything here seems pretty standard. Moving on to the next deck list that I found here, we do find Ceruledge EX here. They do run the 3 copies of it. It is Fire type here. And we can only use that first attack, the Abyssal Blaze, with 30 base damage and then 20 more damage for each energy card in your discard pile. And then the second attack, we don't even bother with that. It's the Amethyst Rage with 200 base damage, and then you discard all energies for 280 damage. So we won't be using that second attack. But the first attack can be really good. We do have a lot of energies in this deck to put into the discard pile. They run the 9 Fire, 6 Water, and then even 3 Jet Energy, as well as 1 Legacy Energy, which will be the ace spec card for this deck. With Legacy Energy, you can attach this to one of your Pokemon, and then when it does get knocked out in the active spot, your opponent does take 1 prize card less for that knockout. And this definitely does look like this is very much a turbo deck. They do run the 1 copy of Squawk here for the Squawk and Seized, 4 copies of Carmine, and then 2 Research. And they do even run the 1 copy of Briar, which is pretty good also, because Ceruledge is a terrestrial Pokemon, and you could potentially steal the game with Briar here as well. And then they do have the 1-1 line with the Palkia V and V-Star. Very solid attacking water Pokemon. You can do quite a lot of damage with Palkia, especially since Area 0 is still being used in the current format. So you can definitely max out at with a lot of damage with Palkia. And moving on to the next deck list, this is a similar Ceruledge deck list here as well, except they changed up the ace spec for this one, but it still does run the 1-1 line with the Palkia V-Star. They kept that. as well as they did add an extra copy of Squawkabilly EX here. And they still even run the Briar and all that stuff, and just about the same amount of energies, that they just don't run the A-Spec Legacy energy or any Jet energy here. And they do change up their A-Spec here. They do run the new A-Spec from Surging Sparks here. So let me just get a refresher here. It's the perfect mixer where you can search your deck for 5 cards and discard them, and then shuffle your deck. So yeah, I can see why they want to use this A-Spec for this deck. They can put a bunch of energies into their discard pile to really up that damage for their Ceruledge here. And then they do have the 1 copy of, I guess, the Irida for their Palkia V-Star. They have Lost City here as well. And 3 Night Stretchers. Yeah, more or less very similar to the last deck, except, you know, they just changed up the A-Spec here. Moving on to the next deck list, we do have the new Pikachu that is Terrestrial. It is still Lightning type as before, but it is also a very powerful Pokemon. Even though it only has 200 HP, the ability is where it really comes through here. If this Pokemon has full HP and would be knocked out from an attack, it is not knocked out and its remaining HP becomes just 10. And then it does have that attack Topaz Bolt for a Grass, Lightning, and Metal energy. You can do 300 base damage, which basically knocks out almost everything. And then you discard those 3 energies. And then we do run quite a few basic Pokemon. We do run the Blissey EX here for the ability Happy Switch, so that we can switch a energy card between Pokemon, so that we can quickly get energy onto Pikachu EX when we need it. And we even run the 4 copies of Glass Trumpet to get energies out of the discard pile onto our Blissey. And our Terrestrial Pokemon will be Pikachu EX here, so that will fulfill the requirement for Glass Trumpet. And for our A-Spec, it is pretty interesting. They run a new A-Spec from Surging Sparks, the Precious Carrier, where you can search out your deck for any number of basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench and then shuffle your deck. So that's why there are so many basic Pokemon here. Not only it'll be a great way to get all of your Chanseys, the Mew, the Greninja, the Iron Bundle. And one more new card they have in this deck will be the Stadium card. The Gravity Mountain. Each stage 2 Pokemon in play gets minus 30 HP. So this will make it even easier for Pikachu to take knockouts on stuff like the Charizard or the Dragapult EX or any other stage 2 Pokemon that has a ton of HP. And then for the energy cards, this does run like basically all of the energies that you'll need. It even runs the 2 water energies for the Greninja here. So you got the 2 water, 2 metal, 3 grass, and 3 lightning. So very interesting deck list. Honestly, initially I thought people would run this with Metang to get that 1 last metal energy onto Pikachu, but it looks like Blissey looks like a more suitable option here. And I'm kind of also surprised to not see a single Crispin here. Like, Crispin is such a good card for this. I'm surprised they had no space for it. If anything, I might consider dropping the Heavy Ball for Crispin here, but that's about it. Moving on to the next deck list, we do have the new Milotic EX here. It is definitely going to be a deck for the stall/control user here. We do have 3 copies of Milotic and 3 Feebas, so it is a big part of this deck. And just to get a refresher on what Milotic EX is all about, we do have the Sparkling Scales, where we get to prevent all damage and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Terrestrial Pokemon. And then we do have the attack Hypno Splash, which I'm assuming this deck is not geared for using that, but it's 160 base damage and the active Pokemon is now asleep. So I don't think we'll be using attack. It's mostly there just for the ability to wall out your opponent. And then it does have the 2/2 line of the Noivern and Noibat here. And it still also has an attacking option here. It does still run the 1/1 line of Palkia V and V-Stars in the attacking option. And some new Pokemon also with Surging Sparks. We do have the new Gastrodon here. They do run the 1/1 line of the Shellos and Gastrodon. Let's see what Gastrodon does. Okay, it has the ability Adhesive Bind. As long as this Pokemon is on your benched stage 2 Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponents have no abilities. So another one of those annoying Pokemon, basically just to shut down the abilities of Stage 2 Pokemon. So primarily Charizard is the first card that comes to mind. It won't have the Infernal Rain ability, and it won't be able to get those 3 fire energies for free if we have the Gastrodon on our bench. And that's about it. For the Ace spec, it does run the Hero's Cape, where they get an extra 100 HP on whichever Pokemon they attach that to. And this deck also does have other walling options, and Control does run the one Cornerstone Ogerpon, which is really good for walling off your opponent. And you can even attack with the Ogerpon, which this deck is running Fighting Energy. Yeah, just 1 Fighting Energy, and the 1 Mimikyu as well for walling off your opponent. And it does even run the 5 Water Energies that you can even attack with Greninja as well. I'm kind of surprised this doesn't have the Canceling Cologne to kind of get rid of Manaphy's ability. But yeah, and they do run the Forest Seal Stone as their V-Star power. And yeah, that's all I have to say for this deck. There is another one that is similar to this. Let's see. Yeah, this one is also another similar deck. Not quite exactly the same deck list, but very similar. Instead, they could win for a 2-2 line of the Phoebus and Milotic EX here. And it looks like they dropped the Mimikyu as well. Yeah, they dropped off Mimikyu and Greninja. And they still do run the 1-1 line of the Shallows and Gastrodon. And they do use 1 new card here. They still even run the Hero's Cape as their Ace card. And they do run the Counter Gain, actually. And let me see, this is a tool card. And it looks like it's a reprint card, because it looks like it was printed before in 2018. But if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to is 1 colorless energy less. So basically the attacks will be 1 energy less for us to use stuff like the Noivern for the Corvid Flight. So we can use that for just 1 energy, I guess. No, actually it doesn't look like we'll be using... Yeah, we'll only be using the Covert Flight here and not the Dominating Echo here, because it looks like they don't run any Psychic or Dark energies. So it's just going to be the Covert Flight here to buy time. So this is also just a very similar deck list, something to consider if the first one looks like it's too much, because it does run quite a few Pokemon. Moving on to the next deck list, we do have Miraidon EX is basically back in business. I feel like Miraidon is one of those decks that is not going away anytime soon, and it also did benefit from Surging Sparks. I did get the new single prize Magneton here. They did run 2 of these for that ability Overvolt Discharge, where if you use this ability, the Pokemon is knocked out, the Magneton that is, and then you can attach up to 3 basic energies from your discard pile to your Lightning Pokemon in any way you like. So 3 basic Lightning energies that can definitely build up Iron Hands right away, and then you just attach for turn, and you can attack with that Iron Hands EX, or you can build up Lightning energies for the Raichu V here. And it looks like for the Ace spec, they just run the Prime Catcher, very good Ace spec to run, where it's basically that double switch out, where you gust up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, and then you switch out your own active. And then the Zapdos from Pogo, that's not going away. It's a very useful Lightning Pokemon that you can basically find for free with Miraidon's Tandem unit. And then, let's see, they do run also the new Latias EX here. And it does have the ability Skyline. Your basic Pokemon in play have no retreat cost. So a very useful EX here. Since we run mostly just basic Pokemon here, they'll all have free retreat costs, which will be our Iron Hands EX here as well. And then we have the 1 copy of the Heavy Baton for Iron Hands. And we also do have a new Stadium card here. Let's see, Lively Stadium. Each basic Pokemon in play gets extra 30 more HP, which is really good. Yeah, so that'll definitely bump up the HP on your Iron Hands to 260. Raichu will even have 230. Yeah, looking like a pretty good deck. I feel like Miraidon is not going anywhere. It will always be evolving with the current rotation with every new set. Moving on to the next deck, we do have the Hydreigon EX here. Now, this deck has a lot of stuff going on with it. They do run 2 Stage 2 Pokemon in this deck. Obviously, you have the Hydreigon and the Pidgeot to help you give you consistency. I feel like Pidgeot is almost like a standard right now for the stage 2 decks to give it that more consistency and stability. But let's look at Hydreigon here. We got the first attack for a Dark type and a colorless energy. We have Crashing Headbutt for 200 base damage and discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. And then we do have Obsidian for 130 base damage, and then it does 130 to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So you can potentially take 3 knockouts or take 3 prizes with Obsidian here. Knock out 3 low HP baby Pokemon, or something like a Beebrel with the 130. And this deck I'm kind of skeptical about, like on how well it will do. Because as you can see, it does have a lot going for it, like a lot of different cards, a lot of one-ofs. They only were able to get 1 copy of Boss into this deck, and then 2 Counter Catcher. Because they're obviously running quite a few supporter cards. They need to run the 3 copies of Arven, of course, so they can search out those rare candies. They do run the 1 copy of Roseanne's backup, which is pretty unique. And they do run the 1 copy of Counter Gain just to drop 1 colorless energy from the attack cost for Hydreigon, because, yeah, it does have a colorless energy for its last attack. And it does use the new Pecharunt. The Pecharunt is pretty good also in this deck. You get the free switch in for your Dark type Pokemon into the active. And they do run the 1 copy of Radiant Sword here, which is interesting. I honestly thought Radiant Sword would not be as used because Archelodon kind of just counters it, but they still use it. And let's see, for their ace spec, they do run the Neo Upper Energy, which gives you the 2 of every energies for a stage 2 Pokemon. So that looks like that's going right onto Hydreigon. And then they got the 4 Dark energies, the 1 Metal, 1 Psychic, 1 Fire. So yeah, this deck has a lot going on for it. I don't know how consistent this is going to be. It's definitely a stretch. And I don't know if this is going to be the most top-rated deck. I don't know. And just keep in mind, this is the only one that I found in Japan that was being used in the leagues. So yeah, we'll just have to see here. Moving on to the next deck list, we have another Hydreigon EX deck here, which actually, never mind, this is another one that was in City Leagues. So we do have 2 of them. And this is basically just Hydreigon with the Lost City draw engine and draw support, where they have the Colorless and all of that, the Comfeys, and they're using that as the engine. And then for their ace spec, they do use the Legacy Energy, which is pretty interesting also. I would imagine to attach that to the Hydreigon. And they run the 3 copies of Rare Candy. And you can also see they only run the 2 copies of Hydreigon, so they're not really all in. It's kind of like maybe a backup attack, like if they can get it completely set up. It is kind of tough to set up. And they do use the Mirage Gates. Interestingly enough, they only use 3 Mirage Gates, so... And then they use the new Terra Orb, I believe. Yeah, it's basically an item card. You can search out your deck for a Terra Pokemon and put it right into your hand. So it's basically like an Ultra Ball almost. Without having to discard those 2 cards, you just get the Terra Pokemon for free. And they also do run the Counter Gain to get that 1 energy, that 1 colorless energy removed from the Hydreigon's second attack. And yeah, and they got the 3 Dark, 2 Psychic, 1 Metal, 1 Fire. They do run the Radiant Charizard in this deck as well as the other one. And now moving on to Sylveon EX. There's also another one of these like mid EXs in my opinion. It's not going to be all that great in terms of like super competitiveness, but let's take a look. So as a first attack, for the 1 Psychic and 2 Colorless, you get to do Magical Charm for 160 base damage. And then during your opponent's next turn, attacks used by the defending Pokemon do 100 damage less. And then we have the second attack. Choose 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon and shuffle those Pokemon and all attached cards back into their deck. And then you can't use this attack during your next turn, Angelite. Okay. So it's basically like a disruption Pokemon. It's basically slow down your opponent and to really mess up their setup here. But other than that, this does rely on more solid attackers here. Like, they still run the Raikou V here, which is really good. It can abuse that Area 0 if your opponent runs an Area 0 deck. You can definitely do a lot more damage with Raikou. And then they even do run the Ursaluna here as well. They got the 4 Mirage Gate to help you get all the different energies that you need for Sylveon. And for their Ace Spec, they do run Prime Catcher, which is really good. It's that double switch out. And let's see. And yeah, that's about it. They do run all of the energies. They do run the 3 Psychic, 3 Lightning, and 3 Water. Because they want to use that second attack with Sylveon, the Angelite. And they do run 1 Sableye and 1 Cramorant, which are very good Lost Zone attackers as well. With that Lost Mon, you're basically guaranteed 120 damage. Distribute it in any way you like on your opponent's Pokemon. And let's see. Yeah, that's all I have to say for this deck. I don't know if it's going to be really popular at all. I feel like it's kind of like a lot of decks that are not too great. I feel like people just try to make them really good, or at least somewhat playable, by putting them into a Lost Box setup here, which is what they did here. And now moving on to the Flygon EX here. This is going to be a hit and run deck, I believe, and we do run the 2 copies of Flygon here, the 3 Trapinch, 1 Vibrava. And let's look at Flygon here. Yeah, we're mostly just using that first attack, the Storm Back, for 130 base damage, and then you can switch out this Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. So some of this Pokemon I will be switching out into here looks like are going to be Mimikyu into a wall Pokemon that has Safeguard. We have the 1 copy of Klefki as well, which is also pretty annoying, which does shut down the abilities of basic Pokemon. And yeah, that's just about it. They also do run the Gastrodon as well, which does shut down the abilities of Stage 2 Pokemon that are in play for both you and your opponent. And for the Ace card, they do run the Prime Catcher. They run the 2 Bravery Charms for, I guess, Mimikyu and Ursaluna. And yeah, they also do have the 1 copy of TM Devolution, which I think is kind of important to note, since this deck is not going to be taking a lot of those one-hit KOs, especially against those Stage 2 decks. You will have to use the TM Devolution to knock out Pokemon here. And then they do run the 4 copies of Arven, which is pretty standard, the 2 copies of Boss, 3 copies of Night Stretcher, 3 copies of Rare Candy. And now moving on to the final deck. That's all I really want to say for Flygon. I feel like it's not going to be a super popular deck. It's kind of like going to be just like either a rogue deck or even below that, like rarely used, because it's basically just a hit and run deck. Very similar to the Golisopod, if you remember that from Paradox Rift. And yeah, that's all I want to say for that deck. And moving on to this last deck over here. This is kind of like a bonus deck. I found this also to be used during the leagues in Japan right now for Surging Sparks. And it's basically a Dragapult deck with Disruption, if you can believe it or not. They basically use the 4 copies of Iron Hands EX for that ability Initialization to shut down the ability of all Rule Box Pokemon that have abilities. And then they even have walling options here with the Farigiraf EX here, as well as the Cornerstone Ogerpon EX here with the Cornerstone Stance. And it's very interesting, and I'm kind of wondering how this is going to do here in the United States, I guess. And they do run the new Ace Spec here. Yeah, we did mention this before. It's the Precious Carrier here. We can search out for any number of basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. So it's basically going to find you all of the basic Pokemon you need for this deck. You're going to get your Alakazam, your Iron Thorns, your Ogerpon. It'll definitely help you set up here. And they do run 4 copies of Crispin here as well. And so yeah, I'm just kind of interested. This is like a bonus deck. It was kind of interesting to see a Dragapult EX with so much walling options. So yeah, those are all the decks that I want to cover for Surging Sparks. And what's your opinion? Is one of your decks that are here that I covered that you are going to be playing? Or is there another deck that you'll be playing from Surging Sparks? Leave in the comments below. And as always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.